Chapter 1. The Invitation to Yuletide Shadows. Hercule Poirot sat in his impeccably ordered London flat, the fire crackling softly in the grate as December's chill pressed against the windows. It was the 22nd of December, and the city outside was alive with the hurried bustle of Christmas preparations. Yet Poirot, ever the creature of habit, found little joy in the season's frenzy. He preferred the symmetry of his moustache, the precision of his morning coffee, and the quiet satisfaction of a solved puzzle. On this particular morning, as he sipped his chocolate chord, a knock sounded at the door. His faithful valet George entered bearing a silver tray with a single envelope. "A letter for you, sir," delivered by hand, and the messenger waited for no reply. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Hand-delivered letters were rare in these modern times. He took the envelope, noting its heavy cream paper and the elegant wax seal. An intricate crest featuring a stag rampant beneath a crown of holly. The address was written in a flowing, aristocratic hand, Monsieur Hercule Poirot, Esq. With his customary delicacy, Poirot slit the envelope and withdrew a single sheet. Christmas Manor, Yorkshire. My dear Monsieur Poirot, it is with the greatest urgency, yet also the warmest holiday spirit, that I extend to you an invitation to spend Christmas at my ancestral home. I have long admired your unparalleled intellect and discretion in matters of delicacy. There are certain disturbances here, whispers of an old family legend resurfacing, that I believe only a mind such as yours could lay to rest. The house shall be filled with guests for the Yuletide festivities, and your presence would be an honour. A car will collect you from King's Cross on the afternoon of the 23rd, should you accept. I implore you, come. Yours in anticipation, Lord Reginald Haverford Poirot folded the letter thoughtfully, stroking his magnificent moustache. Lord Haverford, he recalled the name. An old Yorkshire family, wealthy from coal and land, now diminished but still clinging to tradition. Christmas Manor was reputed to be a grand Elizabethan pile, isolated on the moors. And disturbances? The word intrigued him more than any promise of festive cheer. He turned to George. "Prepare my valise, mon ami. We depart for the north tomorrow." The following afternoon found Poirot aboard the train to York, wrapped in his heaviest overcoat and fur-lined gloves. Snow had begun to fall as they left London, thickening as the train steamed northward. By the time they reached Yorkshire, the landscape was blanketed in white, the moors stretching endlessly under a leaden sky. At the station, a liveried chauffeur awaited with a gleaming Rolls-Royce. "Monsieur Poirot, his lordship sends his compliments. Nasty weather coming, sir. Best we get on." The drive to Christmas Manor took nearly an hour, the car ploughing through deepening snow along narrow lanes flanked by stone walls. Darkness fell early, and Poirot watched as the headlights picked out twisted trees and occasional glimpses of frozen streams. At last, the manor emerged from the swirling flakes. A vast rambling structure of mellow stone, its mullioned windows glowing warmly against the night. Turrets rose at each corner, and a great porte-cochere sheltered the entrance. Holly wreaths adorned the massive oak doors, and lanterns flickered in the wind. The chauffeur assisted Poirot from the car just as the heavens opened, unleashing a full blizzard. Poirot hurried up the steps, where the doors swung open to reveal a tall, silver-haired gentleman in evening dress. "Monsieur Poirot, you braved the elements. How splendid!" Lord Reginald Haverford was in his late 60s, with the weathered good looks of his class and eyes that betrayed both relief and anxiety. Come in, you must be half frozen." The entrance hall was magnificent. A soaring space with a hammer-beam roof, suits of armour standing sentinel, and an enormous fireplace where a Yule log blazed. Garlands of evergreens draped the stone walls, intertwined with crimson ribbons and glass ornaments that caught the firelight. The air carried the rich scent of pine, spiced oranges, and roasting chestnuts. "Welcome to Christmas Manor," Lord Haverford said, taking Poirot's coat. "Built in 1587 by my ancestor, Sir Edmund Haverford, quite the rogue from all accounts. We've kept up the old traditions as best we can." As footmen took Poirot's luggage, other figures emerged from adjoining rooms. First came Lady Haverford, a handsome woman of 50, with iron-grey hair and a welcoming smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "So this is the famous Hercule Poirot," she said, extending a hand heavy with rings. "Reginald has spoken of little else since posting that letter." Poirot bowed over her hand. "Madame, the pleasure is mine. Your home is magnificent." More guests appeared. Miss Diana Haverford, the daughter, 25, vivacious, with modern bobbed hair and a scarlet dress that stood out vividly against the ancient stone. Her fiancé, Captain Richard Langley, a bluff military man with a neat moustache and restless energy. Then the family solicitor, Mr. Edgar Thorpe, thin, precise, perpetually adjusting his pince-nez, and Miss Clarissa Thorne, Lady Haverford's companion, a faded gentlewoman who hovered anxiously. Finally, two unexpected guests, Professor Alistair Blackwood, an eminent folklorist with wild white hair and a booming voice, and his young assistant, Mr. Julian Graves, pale and intense. "We are quite the assorted company," Lord Haverford said with forced jollity, as they gathered around the fire with glasses of hot buttered rum. "Professor Blackwood is here researching our family legends, particularly the tale of the Grey Lady." At this, a hush fell. Even the crackling fire seemed subdued. "The Grey Lady?" Poirot inquired politely, his green eyes alert. Lord Haverford hesitated, then laughed. "Old superstition. They say Sir Edmund murdered his wife, Lady Eleanor, in a fit of jealous rage on Christmas Eve, 1599. Since then her ghost walks the Long Gallery at midnight during Yuletide, seeking justice. Complete nonsense, of course." "Yet disturbances have been reported," Professor Blackwood interjected eagerly. "Cold spots, footsteps, doors opening of their own accord. I was invited to document the phenomena scientifically." Diana laughed brightly. "Father only invited the professor because things have been getting worse. Last Christmas, Mrs. Bates, the housekeeper, swore she saw the Grey Lady on the stairs." "Nerves," Captain Langley said dismissively. "Country houses are full of draughts and creaking timbers." But Poirot noted how several guests avoided each other's eyes, how Mr. Thorpe clutched his glass rather tightly. Dinner was announced, a sumptuous affair in the panelled dining hall, with a long oak table gleaming under candlelight. The menu featured traditional Yorkshire fare, roast goose with sage and onion stuffing, flaming Christmas pudding, and mince pies washed down with claret. Conversation flowed, but Poirot sensed undercurrents. Diana and her father exchanged strained glances when inheritance was mentioned. Captain Langley drank rather heavily. Miss Thorne kept watching the windows as though expecting something to appear in the swirling snow. After dinner, the party adjourned to the drawing-room for carols around the piano. Diana played competently, and voices rose in "God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen" and "The Holly and the Ivy." Outside the blizzard raged, rattling the casements. As the clock struck 11, Lord Haverford suggested early retirement. "The weather's worsening. We may be quite cut off tomorrow. Proper old-fashioned Christmas." Poirot was shown to his room in the east wing, a spacious chamber with a four-poster bed, tapestries depicting hunting scenes, and another roaring fire. His window looked out over the snow-covered gardens, where skeletal trees bent in the wind. As George unpacked his things, Poirot stood at the window. Somewhere in the darkness below, he thought he saw a light moving, a lantern perhaps. But when he looked again, it was gone. "Curious," he murmured. "This grey lady, one wonders." George, ever practical, merely inquired whether Sir required anything else before retiring. "Non, merci, George, though perhaps keep your ears open. In old houses, walls have ears, and sometimes voices." Alone at last, Poirot prepared for bed with his usual meticulous care, arranging his toiletries in perfect order. Yet, as he extinguished the lamp, he could not shake the feeling that Christmas Manor held more than mere holiday cheer. Somewhere in the ancient corridors, something waited, something that had drawn him here, not through festive invitation, but through the irresistible lure of mystery. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the manor in silence. And in that silence, Hercule Poirot listened, for the faint, impossible sound of footsteps that no living foot could make. Chapter 2. Whispers of the Ancestral Spectre. The morning of December 24th dawned cold and silent. Hercule Poirot awoke to a world transformed into a vast, unbroken expanse of white. Heavy snow had fallen throughout the night, and the blizzard showed no sign of abating. From his bedroom window, the gardens, the drive, and even the distant moors had vanished beneath a thick, undulating blanket. Only the tops of the tallest yew hedges remained visible, like dark islands in a frozen sea. Poirot dressed with his usual precision. Dark suit, perfectly knotted tie, and a heavy woolen waistcoat against the chill of the old house. As he adjusted his moustache before the mirror, he reflected that isolation suited a mystery. With no possibility of visitors or departures, every soul within Christmas Manor was trapped together until the weather broke. The little grey cells, he thought with satisfaction, would have an undisturbed field in which to work. Descending the grand oak staircase, Poirot found the household already gathered in the breakfast room. A long sideboard groaned under silver chafing dishes, devilled kidneys, kedgeree, grilled kippers, sausages, bacon, and poached eggs. Toast racks stood sentinel beside pots of Oxford marmalade and heather honey. Despite the hearty fare, the atmosphere was subdued. Lord Haverford stood at the window, staring out at the snow with a troubled expression. "We're properly cut off," he announced as Poirot entered. "The telephone lines are down, and Jenkins says the lanes are impassable. We shall have a true old-fashioned Christmas, whether we wish it or not." Lady Haverford poured coffee with steady hands. "At least we are well provisioned. The cellars are full, and the fires are laid." Diana Haverford, bright in a green morning dress, attempted cheer. "It's rather exciting, isn't it? Like being snowed in an Agatha Christie novel." She caught herself and coloured slightly. "No offence, Monsieur Poirot." "None taken, mademoiselle," Poirot replied with a twinkle. "Though in the novels of my esteemed friend, such isolation often precedes events." Captain Langley grunted over his plate of sausages. "Damned inconvenient, if you ask me. I was hoping to get up to the village for some decent cigars." Professor Blackwood, already seated with a notebook open before him, looked up eagerly. "Fascinating conditions for psychical research. Isolation heightens suggestibility. The veil between worlds grows thin in such circumstances." Mr. Thorpe, the solicitor, cleared his throat nervously. "Really, Professor, must we encourage such talk at breakfast?" But it was too late. The seed had been planted, and after the meal, when the party gathered in the great hall before a roaring Yule log, conversation inevitably turned to the legend of the Grey Lady. They arranged themselves in a loose circle of armchairs and sofas. Footmen brought mulled wine and plates of warm mince pies. Outside, the wind moaned around the eaves like a restless spirit. Lord Haverford, perhaps feeling the duty of host, began reluctantly. "I suppose we ought to give Monsieur Poirot the full story, since he's come all this way." He leaned forward, firelight playing across his lined face. "It begins, as these things do with murder. In 1599, Sir Edmund Haverford, my direct ancestor, was newly returned from the wars in the Low Countries. He was a hard man, violent-tempered and deeply jealous. His wife, Lady Eleanor, was renowned for her beauty. There were whispers, always whispers, that she had taken a lover, a young cavalier named Geoffrey de Lisle." Diana shivered dramatically. "They say Sir Edmund caught them together on Christmas Eve in the Long Gallery." "Precisely," her father continued. "In a rage, he struck de Lisle down with his sword and then turned on Eleanor. She fled, but he pursued her to the North Tower. There, at the top of the spiral stair, he threw her from the window into the courtyard below." A collective intake of breath. Even Captain Langley looked uncomfortable. "Both bodies were buried hastily," Lord Haverford went on, "but Sir Edmund's guilt, or perhaps fear of discovery, drove him mad. Within a year he had drunk himself to death. Since then, every Christmas, Lady Eleanor's spirit is said to return, walking the Long Gallery at midnight, searching for justice." Professor Blackwood could contain himself no longer. "The manifestations follow a clear pattern. Cold spots along the gallery, the scent of lavender, Lady Eleanor's favourite perfume, and most compellingly, the sound of a woman weeping. Last year, on Christmas Eve, Mrs. Bates the housekeeper heard footsteps following her when she went to lock up. She turned, and for a moment, only a moment, she saw a figure in grey, with long pale hair, standing at the far end beneath the minstrel's gallery. Miss Thorne, the companion, gave a little gasp and pressed a handkerchief to her lips. "But that's not all," the professor continued enthusiastically. "There are documented sightings going back centuries. In 1782, my predecessor in folklore studies recorded that the then Lord Haverford saw the apparition so clearly that he addressed it by name. It turned, looked at him with terrible sadness, and vanished through a solid wall." Poirot listened intently, his small green eyes moving from face to face. Lord Haverford looked embarrassed but resolute. Lady Haverford's expression was unreadable. Diana seemed thrilled by the drama, while Captain Langley affected boredom. Mr. Thorpe kept polishing his pince-nez with unnecessary vigour. "And these disturbances?" Poirot inquired gently. "They have increased recently?" Lord Haverford hesitated. "There have been incidents, small things. Doors found open that were locked. Footsteps in empty corridors. And last month—" He stopped. "Last month," Diana finished for him, "someone or something moved Mother's jewellery box from her dressing table to the exact spot in the Long Gallery where Lady Eleanor is said to have been confronted by Sir Edmund." Lady Haverford spoke for the first time, her voice cool. "It was probably one of the maids playing a foolish prank." But Poirot noted how her hand trembled slightly as she set down her cup. The professor produced a small leather-bound book from his pocket. "I have here the original account from Sir Edmund's chaplain, written in 1600, May I read a passage?" Without waiting for permission, he opened it and began in a sonorous voice. "On the eve of our Saviour's birth, as the household retired, there came from the long gallery the most piteous crying of a woman in distress. His lordship, being sore afraid, armed himself and went forth with 2 men servants. There they beheld a lady all in grey, her hands outstretched as though in supplication. When his lordship demanded to know her business, she spoke not, but turned and walked through the panelling where no door exists. Thereafter a great cold fell upon the house, and the fires would not burn till morning." He closed the book triumphantly. "The pattern holds across 4 centuries. Captain Langley drained his glass. "Pattern of hysterical servants and imaginative gentlemen, more like." Yet, even as he spoke, a sudden draught swept through the hall, though every door and window was fast shut. The flames in the great fireplace dipped low, and for a moment the temperature seemed to plummet. Miss Thorne gave a small cry. "Merely the chimney," Lady Haverford said sharply. "These old houses are full of draughts." But Poirot observed that several logs had been disarranged, as though an unseen hand had passed through them. Interesting. The morning passed with attempts at normal Christmas preparations. Diana and Miss Thorne decorated the enormous tree in the hall with glass baubles and wax candles. Captain Langley and Julian Graves, the professor's assistant, were sent to fetch more holly from the conservatory. Lord Haverford retreated to his study with Mr. Thorpe. Something about estate papers, Poirot gathered. Finding himself momentarily alone, Poirot took the opportunity to explore. He moved quietly through the ground floor rooms, the library with its thousands of leather-bound volumes, the morning room with delicate French furniture, the gun room smelling of oil and leather. Eventually, he found his way to the long gallery, a magnificent space running the entire length of the west wing. Dark oak panelling rose to a hammered ceiling, and tall windows looked out over the snow-choked gardens. Ancestral portraits lined the walls, stern Haverfords in ruffs and armour, elegant ladies in farthingales and pearls. Poirot walked slowly, his patent leather shoes making no sound on the ancient Turkey carpet. Halfway along, he paused before a portrait of a woman in grey silk, her pale hair dressed high. The brass plate read, "Lady Eleanor Haverford, née Fitzroy, died 1599. The painted eyes seemed to follow him with gentle melancholy. At the far end, beneath the minstrel's gallery, stood a small marquetry table. Poirot approached it thoughtfully. This, then, was the spot where the jewellery box had been found. He examined the floor, the walls, the windows. Nothing appeared disturbed. Yet, when he placed his hand on the panelling where the chaplain's account claimed the apparition had vanished, the wood felt distinctly colder than elsewhere. "Curious," he murmured. As he turned to leave, a faint sound reached his ears, the softest sigh, almost like a woman's breath. He spun around, but the gallery was empty. Only the portraits stared back in silent witness. Poirot stroked his moustache. Superstition? Suggestion? Or something more calculated? Returning to the main hall, he found the party reassembling for luncheon. The brief cold spell had passed, and the fire burned merrily again. But the legend had taken hold. Conversation throughout the meal circled back, inevitably, to ghosts and hauntings, despite Lady Haverford's attempts to redirect it to safer topics, like the King's upcoming Christmas broadcast. After luncheon, as snow continued to fall in thick, silent flakes, Professor Blackwood proposed a séance for that evening. Just a scientific experiment, he assured Lord Haverford, to test the conditions under controlled circumstances. To Poirot's surprise, Lord Haverford agreed, though with obvious reluctance. As the short winter afternoon faded into early darkness, Poirot retired to his room to think. The legend was compelling, certainly. But legends, he knew, were often built upon very human foundations: greed, jealousy, revenge. And in this isolated house, with its strained family relationships and unspoken tensions, the little grey cells whispered that the Grey Lady might prove to have very mortal origins indeed. Outside his window, the snow fell thicker than ever, erasing all traces of the world beyond Christmas Manor. Within its ancient walls, the stage was set, midnight approached. Chapter 3. The Midnight Apparition. The evening of Christmas Eve settled over Christmas Manor like a heavy velvet curtain. Outside, the blizzard had eased into a steady, silent snowfall, each flake drifting past the lighted windows in slow procession. Inside, the great hall glowed with candlelight from the newly decorated tree, its branches laden with glittering ornaments and tiny wax tapers that flickered like stars. Dinner had been a magnificent affair. Turtle soup, turbot with lobster sauce, saddle of mutton, and a towering boar's head garnished with bay leaves and rosemary. The table had sparkled with crystal and silver, and the conversation had been determinedly festive. Yet Poirot, seated between Lady Haverford and Miss Thorne, had sensed the underlying strain. Jokes fell flat. Glances were exchanged too quickly. Wine glasses were refilled too often. After dinner, the party repaired to the drawing-room, where Professor Blackwood's promised séance was to take place. A round mahogany table had been drawn up before the fire, and 12 chairs arranged around it. Heavy brocade curtains were drawn against the night, sealing the room in warmth and shadow. "I must protest," Lady Haverford said quietly to her husband as they entered. "This is unseemly on Christmas Eve." Lord Haverford patted her hand. "It's only a bit of fun, my dear. The Professor assures me it's purely scientific." Poirot took his seat with interest, placing himself between Diana Haverford and young Mr. Graves. The Professor sat at the head, his wild white hair haloed by the firelight. Candles were extinguished until only those on the table remained, casting long shadows across the faces of the assembled company. "We shall begin with a simple circle," Blackwood announced in his deep theatrical voice. "Hands upon the table, palms down, fingers touching those of your neighbours. We seek only to invite any presence that wishes to communicate. No fear, only openness." The circle formed. Poirot felt Diana's cool fingers on his left, and Graves's slightly trembling ones on his right. Captain Langley, opposite, wore an expression of sceptical amusement. Mr. Thorpe looked frankly terrified. Professor Blackwood closed his eyes. "Is there any spirit present who wishes to speak with us this Christmas Eve?" Silence. Only the soft crackle of the fire and the distant moan of wind in the chimneys. He repeated the question more insistently. Still nothing. Then, almost imperceptibly, the temperature in the room began to drop. Poirot felt it first as a chill along his neck, then spreading through the air like icy breath. The candle flames dipped and wavered, though no draught was apparent. Diana gave a small gasp. "It's getting colder." "Patience," the Professor murmured. "The conditions are forming." A faint rapping sounded, 3 distinct knocks from beneath the table. Miss Thorne whimpered. "Is that you, Spirit?" Blackwood asked eagerly. 3 knocks for yes, 1 for no. Are you the Grey Lady of Christmas Manor? 3 more knocks, louder this time. Captain Langley snorted. Someone's foot! But he stopped. Every person at the table had their hands clearly visible above the mahogany surface. The knocks continued in rapid succession, spelling out what the professor claimed was a message in simple code. Poirot listened carefully, but the pattern seemed random to him. Then, abruptly, the candles guttered out altogether. Darkness swallowed the room. A collective cry rose. Someone, Miss Thorne, screamed. "Stay calm!" Lord Haverford commanded. "It's only the draught." But even as he spoke, a new sound filled the room. The soft, unmistakable rustle of silk, as though a woman in long skirts moved among them. Poirot's senses were acute in the darkness. The rustling passed close by him, close enough that he felt the air stir and caught the faintest scent of lavender. Then came the weeping. Low, heartbreaking sobs, as of a woman in deepest grief. Diana clutched Poirot's arm. "Monsieur, do you hear?" "I hear, mademoiselle," he replied quietly. The sobbing grew louder, circling the table. Footsteps, light, deliberate footsteps, accompanied it now, moving across the carpet toward the door. Suddenly, the candles flared back to life, as though relit by an invisible hand. The room was empty save for the 12 seated figures, but the door to the corridor stood wide open, though it had been firmly closed at the start. Professor Blackwood was triumphant. "Magnificent manifestation, the strongest I've ever witnessed." Lady Haverford rose unsteadily. "I think we've had quite enough for one evening." But the events of the séance proved only a prelude. Later, as the household prepared for bed, Poirot lingered in the great hall. The clock had just struck 11:30. Most guests had retired, though he could hear Captain Langley and Lord Haverford murmuring in the library over brandy. Poirot's curiosity drew him toward the long gallery. The legend claimed the Grey Lady walked at midnight. He wished to see for himself. The gallery was dimly lit by a single lamp left burning for the servants. Moonlight filtered through the tall windows, casting silver bars across the carpet. Snow still fell thickly outside, muffling all sound. Poirot walked slowly, his footsteps hushed. He paused before Lady Eleanor's portrait, studying the painted face in the half-light. The expression seemed different now, more sorrowful, perhaps. He had nearly reached the far end when he heard it. The same soft rustle of silk from the séance, but clearer now, coming from the direction of the minstrel's gallery above. Poirot froze. A figure appeared at the top of the small staircase that led down from the gallery. A woman in a long grey gown, her pale hair loose about her shoulders. She moved with unnatural grace, descending step by step. The temperature plummeted. Frost formed on the inside of the nearest window. The apparition reached the bottom step and turned toward Poirot. For a moment, moonlight illuminated her face. Beautiful, tragic, eyes dark with unshed tears. She raised one hand, as though in supplication, and opened her mouth as if to speak. Poirot, ever the rationalist, felt the hairs rise on his neck. Yet he did not retreat. "Madame," he said softly in French, "what is it you wish to tell me?" The figure seemed to hesitate. Then, with heartbreaking clarity, she spoke, a voice like wind through dead leaves. "Justice!" The single word hung in the freezing air. Justice for the betrayed. She took one step toward him. At that moment, a door slammed somewhere in the house. The spell broke. When Poirot looked again, The figure was dissolving like mist in sunlight, until only the faint scent of lavender remained. He stood motionless for a long minute, then briskly retraced his steps. At the entrance to the gallery, he examined the carpet carefully. No footprints marred the pile. Yet, at the spot where the apparition had stood, a single white camellia lay upon the Turkey rug. Fresh, dewed, impossible in midwinter. Poirot picked it up delicately. Camellias had been Lady Eleanor's favourite flower, according to the professor's research. He was still examining the bloom when hurried footsteps approached. Diana Haverford appeared, wrapped in a dressing gown, her face pale. "Monsieur Poirot, thank heavens, I saw you from my window. Did you see her?" "I saw something, mademoiselle," Poirot replied carefully. Diana clutched his arm. "It was the Grey Lady. I couldn't sleep after that dreadful séance, so I was looking out at the snow, and I saw a light moving in the gallery. Then I saw her, clear as day, walking toward the North Tower." "The North Tower?" Poirot's interest sharpened. "Yes, the very stairs from which she was thrown. Father always keeps that door locked now. He says it's unsafe." Yet, even as she spoke, a new sound reached them. A muffled cry from upstairs, followed by running feet. They hurried back to the main landing to find chaos. Miss Thorne stood outside Lady Haverford's door in hysterics, while servants clustered nearby. "Her ladyship!" the companion sobbed. "She's gone, vanished." Lord Haverford emerged from his wife's bedroom, face ashen. "The bed hasn't been slept in. Her dressing gown is still laid out, but she's not in any of the rooms." Captain Langley appeared, pulling on a jacket. "Windows are all fast. The snow's undisturbed beneath them. She can't have gone outside." Professor Blackwood pushed forward. "The spirit has taken her." "It's just as in the old accounts." "Nonsense!" Lord Haverford snapped, though his voice shook. "We must search the house thoroughly." The search began immediately. Every room, every cupboard, every corridor was examined. Poirot joined methodically, noting details, no signs of struggle, no note left behind. They reached the North Tower door, ancient oak, bound with iron, secured by a heavy padlock. "Locked as always," Lord Haverford said, producing the key from his pocket. "Only I have this." He opened it. Stone spiral stairs rose into darkness, lit faintly by a narrow arrow-slit window. Halfway up, they found her. Lady Haverford lay crumpled at the foot of the top landing, unconscious but breathing. A bruise darkened her temple, and her nightgown was torn at the hem. "Good God!" her husband cried, kneeling beside her. Poirot examined the scene swiftly. Fresh scuff marks on the dusty steps, a faint lavender scent lingering in the air, and on the stone beside Lady Haverford's hand, another white camellia. As servants carried her ladyship back to her bed, Poirot lingered, his mind racing. 2 apparitions in one night. A disappearance and discovery in a locked tower. Flowers that could not exist in December. Coincidence, suggestion, or something far more calculated? The house settled into uneasy quiet as Lady Haverford was tended, concussed, but expected to recover. Midnight had passed, Christmas Day had begun, yet Poirot did not sleep. He sat by his fire until dawn, turning the camellia in his fingers, the little grey cells working furiously. The Grey Lady walked indeed. But ghosts, he reflected, did not strike living women unconscious. Nor did they leave floral tributes that could be purchased only in far-off hothouses. No, this was no restless spirit seeking justice, This was a very living person, creating terror for a purpose. And on this Christmas morning, Hercule Poirot resolved to discover what that purpose was, before the ghost claimed another victim. Chapter 4. Secrets Beneath the Mistletoe. Christmas morning broke grey and still. The snow had ceased during the night, leaving the world outside Christmas Manor muffled and luminous under a thick white shroud. No tracks marred the lawns, no smoke rose from distant chimneys. The isolation was absolute. Hercule Poirot descended early, finding the great hall empty, save for a maid tending the Yule log. The enormous tree glittered forlornly, its candles unlit. The events of the previous night had cast a pall over the festivities. Lady Haverford remained in her bedchamber, under the care of Miss Thorne and the housekeeper, Mrs. Bates, a stout, sensible Yorkshire woman who had brought sal volatile and cold compresses. The doctor from the village could not reach them. The lanes remained impassable. Lady Haverford had regained consciousness briefly at dawn, complaining of headache and confusion, but could remember nothing of how she came to be on the tower stairs. Poirot took a solitary breakfast of coffee and toast in the morning room, turning over the facts in his mind. 2 camellias, the scent of lavender, a locked tower entered by persons unknown, and an apparition seen by multiple witnesses, himself included. He was finishing his second cup when Lord Haverford entered, looking as though he had not slept. "Monsieur Poirot," he said heavily, "might I have a private word?" They withdrew to the library, a warm, book-lined sanctuary smelling of leather and old paper. Lord Haverford closed the door and poured himself a small brandy despite the hour. "I owe you an apology," he began. "I invited you here under false pretenses. It was not mere disturbances that prompted my letter. There is more." Poirot waited, hands folded neatly in his lap. "The family is facing ruin," Lord Haverford said bluntly. "Debts, gambling, poor investments, death duties from my father's time. The estate is mortgaged to the hilt. If something is not done soon, Christmas Manor will have to be sold." He paced before the fire. "My daughter Diana's engagement to Captain Langley was meant to save us. He is wealthy, new money from armaments, but the marriage settlement has not yet been signed. Lately he has been hesitant." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And you fear these ghostly manifestations may frighten him away entirely?" "Precisely. He is a practical man. Superstition does not sit well with him. And now, with my wife injured—" Lord Haverford's voice cracked. "Someone is trying to destroy what little hope we have left." "Someone within the house," Poirot observed quietly. Lord Haverford stopped pacing. "You believe it is no ghost?" "I believe, mon ami, that ghosts do not strike ladies on the head, nor leave hothouse flowers in December. But tell me, why do you keep the North Tower locked?" "An old family decision. After a cousin fell on those stairs in the last century, my grandfather had it sealed. The key hangs in my study. Only I possess it. Yet Lady Haverford had been found there. Interesting." The morning passed with subdued attempts at Christmas observance. Gifts were exchanged in the drawing-room. Perfume for Diana, a gold cigarette case for Captain Langley. Leather-bound books for the Professor. Poirot received a handsome edition of Shakespeare from his host, and presented in return small tokens he had brought from London. Silk handkerchiefs, a box of Belgian chocolates. Beneath the polite ritual, tension simmered. Captain Langley was noticeably cool toward Diana, who responded with brittle gaiety. Mr. Thorpe, the solicitor, spent much of the time in murmured conference with Lord Haverford. Professor Blackwood and his assistant Graves were observed taking measurements in the long gallery with tape and thermometer, to the annoyance of the servants. After a light luncheon of cold goose and salad, the younger members proposed outdoor exercise. The snow was deep but crisp, and a walk in the gardens might lift spirits. Poirot declined politely. He detested cold feet, but watched from the window as Diana, Captain Langley, and Julian Graves set out, muffled in coats and scarves. They headed toward the walled rose garden, long neglected but still beautiful under snow. From his vantage, Poirot noted that Diana and the captain walked apart, while young Graves hovered attentively near the girl. Interesting. He turned instead to quiet investigation. While the house was relatively empty, he made his way to Lady Haverford's bedchamber. Miss Thorne admitted him reluctantly. Her ladyship lay propped against pillows, pale but composed. A purple bruise marked her temple. "Monsieur Poirot," she greeted him weakly. "Reginald says you are trying to make sense of this madness." "I try always to make sense, madame. May I ask, do you recall anything of last night after retiring?" She frowned. "I undressed and got into bed. I thought I heard music, faint like a lute. Then a draught, cold air. I rose to close the window, but it was already fast. After that, nothing until I woke here." "Music!" Poirot's interest quickened. "A lute! I may have dreamed it. These old houses creak and whisper." But Poirot recalled the minstrel's gallery above the long gallery, once home to musicians in Elizabethan times. He thanked her and withdrew, pausing in the corridor outside. The scent of lavender lingered faintly here, too. Lady Haverford's perfume was rosewater, he had noted. On impulse, he sought out Mrs. Gushby Bates in the still room. The housekeeper was a practical woman of 50, unimpressed by ghosts. "Seen her myself, sir," she admitted when Poirot broached the subject. "3 years ago on the stairs, but I don't hold with frightening folks. Someone's playing tricks, mark my words." "These camellias," Poirot said, producing the slightly wilted bloom he had kept. "Where might they come from?" Mrs. Bates examined it knowingly. "Hothouse, sir. We've none here. The conservatory glass broke last winter, and his lordship couldn't afford repairs. Nearest would be Lord Ashbury's place, 10 miles off, or the florist in York. Both unreachable in this weather." "And lavender," he pressed. "Plenty dried in the linen cupboard, sir. We use it for sachets. Fresh would be impossible now." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Dried lavender could be used to create the scent. The flowers must have been brought into the house earlier, by someone who planned this campaign of terror. Returning to the main floor, he encountered Professor Blackwood emerging from the long gallery, flushed with excitement. "Monsieur Poirot, remarkable readings. The temperature dropped 12 degrees at the exact spot where the apparition appeared to you, and my photographic plate, exposed overnight, shows a distinct orb of light." Poirot regarded him steadily. "You believe, then, in the supernatural?" "I believe in phenomena that science has not yet explained," the professor declared. "Though I confess, the attack on Lady Haverford troubles me. Spirits do not typically inflict physical harm." "Precisely," Poirot murmured. Tea was served early in the drawing-room, with crumpets and Christmas cake. The outdoor party returned, rosy-cheeked and apparently reconciled. Diana laughing at something Captain Langley said, Graves trailing behind looking moody. As they gathered around the fire, conversation turned inevitably to the mystery. "I still say it's someone in this house," Captain Langley stated flatly. trying to scare us all witless." "But who would gain?" Diana asked. "And how did they get Mother into the locked tower?" Mr. Thorpe cleared his throat. "If I may, there is another matter. The family jewels. Lady Haverford's sapphires were to be part of Diana's marriage settlement. They have disappeared." A stunned silence fell. Lord Haverford went white. "When?" "This morning, my lord. I went to the safe to fetch the inventory for Captain Langley, and the case was gone." Poirot leant forward. "The safe, was it forced?" "No, sir. Opened with the combination. Only his lordship and her ladyship know it." All eyes turned to Lord Haverford, who looked stricken. "I have not touched them," he said hoarsely. Lady Haverford was sent for and confirmed, through Miss Thorne, that she had not moved the jewels. The atmosphere grew thick with suspicion. Captain Langley rose abruptly. "This is intolerable. If these jewels are not recovered, I must reconsider." "Richard, please!" Diana cried. But he strode from the room. In the ensuing awkwardness, Poirot quietly excused himself. He needed solitude to arrange the little grey cells. In his bedroom, he paced before the fire. Motives were emerging like crocuses through snow. Financial desperation, a faltering engagement, missing jewels, an attack that might have killed Lady Haverford. And throughout, the Grey Lady, used as a most convenient smokescreen. Someone in this house knew the legend intimately. Someone who could move unseen through corridors, who had access to dried lavender and hothouse flowers smuggled in before the snow. Someone who wished to prevent the marriage, or hasten the sale of the estate, or conceal a theft. But who? Poirot paused at his window. In the snowy garden below, he saw two figures walking the path that had been shoveled clear, Diana and Julian Graves. They stood close together beneath the arching yew boughs, hung with mistletoe. As Poirot watched, Graves took Diana's hand and raised it to his lips. She did not pull away. Ah! The pieces shifted, realigned. Jealousy. Young love thwarted by necessity, perhaps an accomplice, or perhaps something darker. Dinner that evening was a strained affair. Captain Langley sent word he had a headache and would take a tray in his room. The remaining guests picked at roast beef and Yorkshire pudding while avoiding one another's eyes. Afterward, as the ladies withdrew, Lord Haverford drew Poirot aside. "The jewels must be found, monsieur. If Langley withdraws, we are finished." Poirot nodded. "They will be found, mon ami, and the author of these disturbances unmasked. But I require one thing of you. Anything. Tonight, after the household retires, we shall set a trap for our ghost." Lord Haverford's eyes widened, but he agreed. As the clock struck 10, the house grew quiet. Fires were banked, candles snuffed. One by one, doors closed along the corridors. But in the long gallery, two men waited in darkness, Hercule Poirot and Lord Haverford, seated motionless in high-backed chairs concealed behind a suit of armour. The trap was baited, and somewhere in the ancient house, the Grey Lady prepared to walk again. Chapter 5. Clues in the snow-covered grounds. The house slept uneasily on the night of Christmas Day. Fires burned low in the grates, and the ancient timbers creaked as though sharing secrets with the wind. In the long gallery, however, two men remained wide awake. Hercule Poirot and Lord Haverford sat in darkness behind a suit of armour at the northern end, near the door to the north tower. A single candle, heavily shaded, gave just enough light for them to see the length of the gallery without revealing their presence. The turkey carpet stretched before them like a silent river. The ancestral portraits watched with painted indifference. Midnight came and went. The great clock in the hall struck 1, then 2. Nothing stirred. At 2:30, Lord Haverford shifted impatiently. "Perhaps she will not come tonight," he whispered. "Patience, mon ami," Poirot murmured. "Our ghost is cautious. She knows the house is on edge after last night's events." They waited. At 10 minutes to 3, a faint sound reached them, the softest click of a latch from the southern end. A sliver of light appeared as a door opened, then vanished. For footsteps, almost inaudible, began to move along the carpet. A figure emerged into the faint moonlight filtering through the high windows. A woman in a long grey gown, pale hair unbound, carrying a small lantern that cast an eerie glow. She moved slowly, deliberately, pausing now and then as though listening. Lord Haverford tensed beside Poirot, but the detective laid a restraining hand on his arm. The apparition approached the spot beneath the minstrel's gallery, where the first camellia had been found. There she stopped, raised the lantern, and seemed to gaze at Lady Eleanor's portrait. A low sigh escaped her, half sorrow, half theatricality. Then she continued toward the North Tower door. Poirot watched intently. The figure reached the door, produced a key from the folds of her gown, and inserted it into the padlock. The lock opened with a faint scrape. She slipped through, closing the door softly behind her. Lord Haverford could contain himself no longer. "That's my key! How dare—" "Silence!" Poirot hissed. "We follow, but at a distance." They waited a full minute before moving. Poirot took the shaded candle. Lord Haverford carried the key he had retained. At the tower door they paused. Faint footsteps echoed on the spiral stairs above, ascending. Together they entered and climbed cautiously. The stone steps were icy cold, their breath clouded in the air. Halfway up, the footsteps ceased. A dim light glowed from the landing above. They reached the top to find the grey figure standing at the narrow window, lantern at her feet, staring out over the snowbound landscape. Her back was to them. Lord Haverford raised his candle. "Diana!" he exclaimed in a strangled voice. The figure whirled. It was indeed Diana Haverford, her face pale beneath the powder she had used to whiten it. Her dark hair concealed beneath a pale wig. The grey gown was an old theatrical costume from the attics. "Father," she faltered. "Monsieur Poirot!" Lord Haverford looked devastated. "My own daughter! Why?" Diana's composure cracked. Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't mean to hurt Mother. I swear it. I only wanted to frighten everyone, to stop the marriage." Poirot stepped forward. "Mademoiselle, you will explain everything. But first, descend with us to the warmth. These stairs are no place for confessions." They returned to the library, where Poirot kindled the fire to a bright blaze. Diana sat huddled in a chair, the grey gown draped about her like a shroud. Lord Haverford poured brandy with shaking hands. "It began as a foolish prank," Diana began, voice trembling. "Julian, Mr. Graves, and I, we fell in love almost from the moment Professor Blackwood arrived with him in November. But Father needed Richard's money so desperately. I felt trapped." Lord Haverford flinched but said nothing. "So Julian and I devised a plan. We would revive the Grey Lady legend, make the house seem cursed, so that Richard would withdraw and Father would have to sell. Julian has been secretly buying options on the estate through an agent. Once sold cheaply, he could restore it, and we could marry." Poirot nodded slowly. "The disturbances began before my arrival then. The jewellery box moved, the footsteps, and the camellias. Julian brought them from York before the snow. He has a small hothouse connection through the university. The lavender sachets were easy, taken from the linen cupboard. And the wig, the gown, from the attics. There are trunks of old theatrical costumes. Grandmother was an amateur actress. Lord Haverford found his voice. "But your mother! Diana, how could you risk her?" "That was an accident," Diana cried. "Last night, after the séance, I went to Mother's room to leave another camellia on her pillow, just to deepen the fear. She woke suddenly and saw me in the costume. She screamed and ran toward the tower door. I had left it unlocked. I followed to stop her crying out, but she slipped on the stairs in the dark. I struck her only to quiet her, then carried her up so it would seem the ghost had lured her there." Poirot's eyes were grave. "You might have killed her, mademoiselle." Diana buried her face in her hands. "I know. I have been sick with guilt all day." "And the jewels?" Lord Haverford demanded hoarsely. Diana looked up, startled. "The sapphires! I know nothing of them, truly." Poirot stroked his moustache thoughtfully. "Then we have a second criminal in our midst. The ghost was convenient cover for another crime." Dawn was beginning to pale the windows when they concluded the interview. Lord Haverford, shattered but resolute, declared he would deal with his daughter privately, no police, for the family's sake. Julian Graves would be dismissed and warned never to approach Diana again. But Poirot was not satisfied. As Lord Haverford escorted the weeping Diana to her room, Poirot slipped outside through a side door into the crisp morning air. The snow lay unbroken across the gardens, save for one set of footprints leading from a ground-floor window of the east wing to the old conservatory and back. The east wing, where Professor Blackwood and his assistant had their rooms. Poirot followed the tracks. The conservatory door stood ajar, though it had been locked since the glass breakage last year. Inside, amid broken panes and dead vines, he found fresh evidence. A small bundle, wrapped in oilskin, buried beneath a pile of leaves. He opened it carefully. Lady Haverford's sapphire necklace, earrings and brooch gleamed coldly in the morning light. "Ah," Poirot murmured. The professor, or more likely his pale young assistant, saw opportunity in the chaos. While we were all distracted by ghosts, a thief struck. He rewrapped the jewels and returned to the house. Breakfast was a sombre meal. Diana did not appear. Captain Langley announced coldly that he was ending the engagement. Ghosts or no ghosts, he wanted no part of such a family. Lord Haverford accepted it with weary dignity. After the meal, Poirot requested that the entire household assemble in the great hall. When all were gathered, servants included, he stood before the Yule log and addressed them calmly. "Mesdames et messieurs, the mystery of the Grey Lady is solved. She was no spirit, but a very human young lady, attempting to alter her destiny through terror. The attack on Lady Haverford was unintended, and the manifestations cease as of this morning." Relief rippled through the room. Professor Blackwood looked disappointed, his grand phenomena reduced to costume drama. "But," Poirot continued, "there remains the matter of the stolen jewels." He produced the oilskin bundle and unwrapped it. Gasps echoed around the hall. These were hidden in the conservatory, taken advantage of the confusion created by our ghost. The footprints in the snow, made last night while we watched the gallery, led directly from Mr. Graves's window. Julian Graves went deathly pale. "It was you, monsieur, who saw the safe combination when Lord Haverford opened it yesterday morning. You who waited until the house was distracted by the ghost hunt to steal them. planning to retrieve them once the snow melted and suspicion had passed. Graves tried to bluster, but under Poirot's steady gaze he crumbled. "I needed the money," he muttered. "The professor pays me nothing." And when Diana told me her plan, it seemed the perfect moment. Lord Haverford looked at him with contempt. "You will leave this house today, sir. The jewels are recovered. I will not prosecute for Diana's sake. But if you ever return to Yorkshire, you will face the full weight of the law." Graves was escorted to pack his bag. Professor Blackwood, mortified, announced he would depart with his disgraced assistant as soon as the roads cleared. The house exhaled. By afternoon, weak winter sunshine broke through the clouds. Servants began clearing paths. The snow started to melt from the eaves in long icicles. Lady Haverford, informed privately by her husband, sent word that she forgave Diana and wished to see her. Poirot stood at his bedroom window, watching the transformation. The snow-covered grounds, so full of hidden clues hours before, now revealed their secrets openly. The footprints to the conservatory, a dropped camellia half buried near the rose garden, even the faint outline where the Grey Lady had practiced her walk, all so clear in daylight. He smiled a little. Another mystery resolved by order and method. The supernatural banished by the light of reason. Yet, as he turned away, a final thought struck him. The jewels had been recovered, the ghost unmasked, the marriage ended, but Lord Haverford's debts remained. Christmas Manor was still doomed unless a new buyer appeared. Poirot's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Perhaps, after all, young Mr. Graves's options on the estate might yet prove useful. Perhaps a quiet word with a certain Belgian financier of Poirot's acquaintance. But that was for another day. For now, the house was at peace. The Yule log burned brightly, and outside the snow began its slow retreat, taking with it the last shadows of the Grey Lady. Chapter 6. The Eve of Revelations. December 26th brought a thaw. Weak sunshine filtered through thinning clouds, and water dripped steadily from the eaves of Christmas Manor. Paths had been cleared through the snow. The outside world felt close again, yet no one had departed. Professor Blackwood and Julian Graves remained, the former claiming he needed to document the debunking for his records, the latter silent and sullen under Lord Haverford's watchful eye. Hercule Poirot, however, was not content. He had risen early and spent the morning in quiet observation. The recovery of the jewels and the unmasking of Diana's ghostly masquerade had restored a fragile calm to the household, yet certain details continued to disturb the perfect symmetry of his solution. Firstly, the attack on Lady Haverford. Diana's confession that she had struck her mother only to silence her rang true in its panic, but Poirot disliked loose ends. Secondly, the precision of the manifestations, the cold spots, the scent, the weeping heard during the séance. An accomplice? Or had Diana been more practiced than she admitted? And thirdly, most troubling, Captain Langley's abrupt withdrawal. The captain had declared the engagement broken at breakfast, citing the unstable atmosphere of the house, and had spent the day closeted in the gun-room cleaning rifles that needed no cleaning. Poirot required clarity. On this, the eve of final revelations, he would force the truth into the open. After luncheon, cold cuts and pickled beets eaten in near silence, Poirot requested a private word with Lord Haverford in the study. "Mon ami," he began, settling into a leather armchair. "Your family crisis is resolved, yes? The jewels returned, the false ghost banished, the unsuitable engagement ended. Lord Haverford nodded wearily. Thanks to you, monsieur. Though the cost, Diana is heartbroken. And we are no nearer saving the estate. That is not yet concluded, Poirot said mysteriously. But first, I must ask, do you trust everyone remaining in this house? Haverford frowned. After yesterday? Hardly. Precisely. There is one thread still dangling. I propose we gather everyone this evening in the long gallery. We shall recreate the conditions of Christmas Eve. A second séance, if you will permit the term, under my direction. Lord Haverford looked alarmed. Another séance? After what happened to my wife? No spirits will be invited, Poirot assured him. Only truth, and I shall ensure no harm comes to anyone. Reluctantly, Haverford agreed. The rest of the afternoon passed in strained activity. Diana kept to her room. Lady Haverford, much recovered, came downstairs for tea but spoke little. Miss Thorne fluttered anxiously, fetching shawls and cushions. Mr. Thorpe buried himself in legal papers. Captain Langley continued his solitary brooding. Professor Blackwood, meanwhile, cornered Poirot in the library. Astonishing development, monsieur. The human agent behind an apparently genuine haunting. I must include it in my forthcoming book, naturally with names changed. Poirot regarded him coolly. You are satisfied, then, that no genuine manifestation occurred? Blackwood hesitated. Scientifically, yes, though the cold spots were remarkably consistent with psychical phenomena. And your assistant? He played no part in the deceptions. Graves? Certainly not. The boy is a thief, I grant you, but hardly capable of such elaborate theatre. Poirot merely smiled. As dusk fell, the long gallery was prepared. Heavy curtains were drawn against the early darkness. Candles were placed upon a small table at the northern end beneath the minstrel's gallery. Chairs were arranged in a semicircle, facing the spot where the Grey Lady had twice appeared. At 8 o'clock, the household assembled at Poirot's summons. Lord and Lady Haverford, Diana, pale but composed, Captain Langley, Mr. Thorpe, Miss Thorne, Professor Blackwood, and Julian Graves. Even Mrs. Bates and 2 senior maids were invited to sit at the rear. Poirot believed servants often saw what their masters missed. The atmosphere was electric with unease. Poirot stood at the centre, small and immaculate, his eyes bright. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "we are here to lay the Grey Lady finally to rest. Much has been explained, yet certain inconsistencies remain. Tonight, under controlled conditions, we shall resolve them all." He gestured to the table. "We shall sit as we did for the séance, hands visible, no contact. But this time, there will be no invitation to spirits. We wait only for human truth to reveal itself." They took their places. Candles flickered. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Minutes passed in silence. Then, as on Christmas Eve, the temperature began to drop. Breath became visible. The candle flames dipped low. Miss Thorne whimpered. Diana stared fixedly at the floor. Professor Blackwood leaned forward eagerly. "Remarkable! The conditions are reproducing themselves." Poirot watched every face. A faint rustle of silk sounded from the southern end of the gallery. All heads turned. The grey figure appeared once more, gliding slowly from the shadows, lantern in hand, pale hair gleaming. Captain Langley half rose. "This is intolerable. Sit down, monsieur," Poirot commanded sharply. "Observe!" The apparition moved closer, repeating her previous performance, pausing beneath Lady Eleanor's portrait, sighing, drifting toward the tower door. But this time Poirot was prepared. He rose swiftly and stepped forward, blocking her path. "Enough, mademoiselle," he said firmly. "The game is over." The figure halted. For a moment she stood motionless, then reached up and removed the pale wig. Not Diana. Miss Clarissa Thorne stood revealed, her own mousy hair pinned tightly, her face defiant beneath the white powder. Gasps echoed through the gallery. "Clarissa!" Lady Haverford cried. The companion lifted her chin. "Yes, my lady, it was I." Lord Haverford looked thunderstruck. "But why?" Miss Thorne's voice trembled, yet she spoke clearly. "Because I have loved you, Reginald, for 20 years. Ever since I came here as companion to your wife after your son's death. You were kind to me, kinder than anyone ever was. And I watched you sink deeper into trouble, ready to sell everything to that vulgar soldier for money." Captain Langley bristled, but Poirot raised a hand for silence. "I could not bear it," Miss Thorne continued, "when I overheard Diana and young Graves plotting their foolish ghost. I saw my chance. I encouraged them, supplied the old costume from the attics, showed Diana the secret passage from the minstrel's gallery that leads behind the panelling." A secret passage? Poirot's eyes gleamed. That explained the vanishing in the chaplain's account. "I performed most of the manifestations myself," Miss Thorne said. "The footsteps, the weeping during the séance, the cold spots. I used blocks of ice from the ice house wrapped in cloths hidden beneath my gown. The scent was my own lavender water." "And the attack on Lady Haverford?" Poirot asked quietly. Miss Thorne's defiance cracked. Tears filled her eyes. "That was unintended. On Christmas Eve, after Diana's first appearance frightened everyone, I waited in the passage. When her ladyship fled in panic, I tried to stop her at the tower stairs. We struggled. She fell. I only meant to keep her quiet until morning, so the terror would force Captain Langley away." Lady Haverford stared at her companion of 2 decades, shock and pity mingling on her face. Diana spoke for the first time. "You used me. You let me believe I was responsible. I protected you," Miss Thorne said fiercely. "When suspicion might have fallen on you, I continued the appearances to keep attention on the ghost." Professor Blackwood found his voice. "Extraordinary! A dual haunting, genuine human agency producing classic psychical effects." Poirot ignored him. "And the camellias, mademoiselle. I ordered them from York months ago for Christmas decorations. They were delivered just before the snow. I thought they added a touching detail." Captain Langley rose. "This is madness. The house is a bedlam. I'm leaving at first light, roads or no roads." "No need, monsieur," Poirot said calmly. "The haunting ends tonight. Miss Thorne will depart with the Professor and Mr. Graves tomorrow. The jewels are restored. The estate, that is for Lord Haverford to decide." He turned to the companion. "You acted from love, mademoiselle, misguided criminal love, but love nonetheless. I think no charges will be pressed." Lord Haverford, face lined with sorrow, nodded slowly. "No police. Clarissa, you will pack tonight. I shall provide a pension, enough to live quietly elsewhere, but you cannot stay." Miss Thorne bowed her head. Tears fell silently onto the grey gown. The candles were relit fully. The gallery seemed to warm as though the house itself exhaled. As the company dispersed in stunned silence, Poirot lingered with Lord and Lady Haverford. "There is one more matter," he said quietly. "The estate. I have taken the liberty of telegraphing, before the lines went down, a business acquaintance in Brussels. He is interested in purchasing Christmas Manor, not to dismantle it, but to restore it as a historical trust, with favourable terms for your family to remain as custodians." Lord Haverford stared. You would do that? For the sake of justice, and an old house that deserves to live, Poirot replied. Lady Haverford pressed his hand. You have given us more than a solution to a mystery, monsieur. You have given us hope. In the corridor outside, Poirot encountered Diana. She looked young and vulnerable, without her usual bravado. I was a fool, she said simply. Thank you for protecting me. Learn from it, mademoiselle, Poirot advised gently. Love one honestly is the only kind worth having. She nodded, eyes bright with unshed tears. Later, as Poirot prepared for bed, he stood at his window, watching moonlight silver the melting snow. The grounds lay peaceful. No ghostly figure walked. The Grey Lady had been laid to rest, not by exorcism but by truth. Tomorrow the roads would clear, guests would depart. Life at Christmas Manor would begin anew, scarred, perhaps, but healed. Hercule Poirot smiled into the darkness. Another triumph for the little grey cells. And somewhere in the ancient walls, he fancied, the real Lady Eleanor, betrayed and murdered 4 centuries ago, might at last be at peace. Chapter 7. Unmasking the Phantom. The morning of December 27th arrived crisp and bright. Meltwater cascaded from the roof in silver streams, and the snow on the lawns had settled into a hard, glittering crust. Servants were busy packing trunks in the east wing. Professor Blackwood and Julian Graves were to depart on the midday train from York, and Miss Thorne would accompany them as far as London, before continuing to a quiet seaside town where a cousin lived. The atmosphere in the great hall at breakfast was one of strained politeness. No one spoke of the previous night's revelations, yet the air crackled with unspoken farewells and regrets. Hercule Poirot, however, had not finished. He had passed a restless night, arranging and rearranging the facts in his mind. Miss Thorne's confession had been dramatic, heartfelt, and, in many particulars, convincing. Yet certain elements refused to fit the elegant pattern his little grey cells demanded. The cold spots had been too precisely localized for blocks of ice carried beneath a gown. The weeping during the séance had come from multiple directions simultaneously. And most troubling of all, on the night of the first apparition, the night he himself had seen the Grey Lady in the Long Gallery, Miss Thorne had been seated beside Lady Haverford in the drawing-room, playing carols at the piano until well past midnight. Someone else had worn the grey costume that night. Poirot required a final gathering. At 11 o'clock, just as the professor's luggage was being loaded onto the sleigh that would take them to the station, Poirot appeared in the hall and addressed the company with quiet authority. Mesdames et messieurs, one last time I must impose upon your patience. Before any departure, we shall assemble in the Long Gallery. There remains a phantom to unmask completely. Protests arose. Captain Langley declared he had heard quite enough ghostly nonsense. Diana pleaded fatigue, but Lord Haverford supported Poirot. Monsieur Poirot has earned our trust, he said firmly. We will hear him out. Reluctantly, the household gathered once more in the Long Gallery. Sunlight now streamed through the tall windows, laying bright bars across the carpet and robbing the space of much of its menace. The ancestral portraits looked down with stern disapproval. Poirot stood beneath Lady Eleanor's portrait, hands clasped behind his back. "We have had confessions," he began, "and dramatic revelations. Yet the true author of these disturbances, the one who planned them from the beginning, has not yet spoken. I speak now of a crime far older than misplaced love or youthful rebellion. I speak of murder. A shocked silence fell. "Murder," Lord Haverford echoed. "But my wife is recovering. I do not speak of Lady Haverford." Poirot interrupted gently. "I speak of a murder attempted 4 nights ago, on Christmas Eve, in this very gallery." All eyes turned instinctively to the spot where the first camellia had lain. Poirot continued. "On that night, I myself encountered the Grey Lady. She spoke to me, one word only, justice. At the time, I believed it part of the masquerade. But ghosts do not speak, mes amis, and they do not attempt to push living men from tower windows." Captain Langley started. "What are you implying?" "I imply nothing, monsieur. I state facts. That night, after the apparition dissolved, I examined the North Tower stairs more closely than I admitted. I found scuff marks, not only from Lady Haverford's fall the following night, but older marks, higher up, where a struggle took place. Marks made by gentlemen's boots. And on the stone sill of the arrow-slit window, a thread of military greatcoat wool." Langley's face darkened. Professor Blackwood cleared his throat nervously. "But surely—" Poirot raised a hand. "Let us reconstruct. The disturbances began weeks ago. Small things to build fear. Then, on Christmas Eve, the true plan was set in motion. The apparition appeared to me here, luring me towards the tower. Had I followed more closely, I might have been pushed from the window, my death blamed on the ghost. But I am cautious, and the attempt failed." Diana gasped. "Who would want to kill you, Monsieur Poirot?" "No one, mademoiselle. I was not the intended victim. I was merely in the way." He turned to face the company fully. The intended victim was Lord Haverford himself. Lord Haverford went pale. "Me? Yes, mon ami. Think, you invited me here because of the disturbances. The murderer needed to stop investigation before it began. But when I arrived, despite the snow, the plan changed. The ghost would drive away Captain Langley, and with him, the money that would save the estate. Financial ruin would force sale, and who stood to gain most from that sale?" All eyes turned slowly to Mr. Edgar Thorpe, the family solicitor. The thin man adjusted his pince-nez with trembling fingers. "This is absurd. I have served this family faithfully for 30 years. "Faithfully?" Poirot's voice was soft but relentless. "Or profitably? I made inquiries, monsieur, through friends in London before the telephone lines failed. You have been quietly buying up the mortgages on this estate through anonymous companies. When Lord Haverford defaulted, the property would be sold at forced auction, to you, at a fraction of its value." Thorpe's face drained of colour. "You needed the hauntings to frighten away Captain Langley's money. You encouraged the legend, perhaps even suggested to Professor Blackwood that he apply to study here. You supplied Miss Thorne with the idea of using the secret passage. She confided in you as the family confidant. Miss Thorne gave a small cry. He told me it would only be harmless tricks to save the house." "Harmless," Poirot repeated. "Yet when Diana and Graves began their own scheme, you saw greater opportunity. You took the costume yourself on Christmas Eve, appeared to me, attempted to lure Lord Haverford to the tower when he investigated noises, but he sent servants instead." Thorpe tried to speak, but Poirot pressed on. "The jewels, you took them to deepen the chaos, planning to discover them later and appear the hero. The attack on Lady Haverford, unplanned but useful. Everything to hasten ruin." Captain Langley stepped forward angrily. "If this is true, it is true," Poirot said quietly, "and there is proof. In your room, Monsieur Thorpe, wrapped in legal papers in your dispatch case, you will find the grey gown, the wig, and the remaining camellias. Also, a notebook detailing the mortgage purchases. Lord Haverford turned to his footman. "Search his room, now!" Thorpe made a sudden bolt toward the door, but Captain Langley, military instincts sharp, seized him by the collar and held him fast. Minutes later, the footman returned with the incriminating bundle. The gown still carried faint traces of lavender water. The notebook listed transactions in Thorpe's precise hand. The solicitor crumpled. I only wanted the house. It should have been mine. My family served the Haverfords for generations, yet received nothing when the debts mounted." Lord Haverford looked at him with profound sadness. "You could have come to me, Edgar. We might have found a way." But Thorpe only shook his head. Professor Blackwood, ever the scientist, murmured, "Extraordinary! A triple-layered deception, youthful love, jealous devotion, and cold greed." Poirot allowed himself a small smile. The Grey Lady served many masters, but in the end she served justice. Arrangements were made swiftly. Mr. Thorpe would be taken to York by Captain Langley himself and delivered to the authorities. Charges of attempted murder, theft, and fraud would be laid. Miss Thorne, her role minor and unwitting in the greater crime, would still depart quietly with her pension. Graves's theft of the jewels would be overlooked in light of the larger events. As the sleigh departed an hour later, carrying Blackwood, Graves, Thorne, and the handcuffed Thorpe, the remaining household stood on the steps, watching it vanish down the newly cleared drive. Lady Haverford leaned on her husband's arm. Diana stood close beside them, the family drawn together by shared ordeal. Captain Langley, his departure postponed, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Perhaps I was hasty about the engagement. If Miss Diana is willing to reconsider." Diana smiled shyly. "Perhaps, Captain, we might start again, properly this time." Poirot watched the small reconciliations with satisfaction. The phantom was unmasked. Greed had worn the grey gown, but truth had stripped it away. As he turned back into the house, Lord Haverford clasped his hand warmly. "You have saved more than my life, Monsieur Poirot. You have saved my family, and perhaps the Manor itself." Poirot twinkled. "The Belgian financier still wishes to purchase, but now on terms that will clear the legitimate debts and allow you to remain. A happy Christmas after all, no?" Inside, the great hall seemed brighter, the Yule log's embers glowing with new life. The Grey Lady would walk no more. Justice, 4 centuries delayed, had finally come to Christmas Manor. Chapter 8. The Dawn of Christmas Justice. The morning of December 28th brought a transformed world to Christmas Manor. The thaw had accelerated overnight. Broad patches of green lawn emerged from retreating snow, and the moors beyond shimmered under a pale winter sun. Rooks wheeled and cawed above the chimneys, as though announcing the return of ordinary life. Hercule Poirot stood in the great hall, valise packed and waiting beside the door. His fur-lined overcoat lay ready, and George hovered discreetly in the background. The detective had intended to depart on the early train, but Lord Haverford had begged him to remain for one final gathering, a proper farewell, and a true Christmas celebration delayed by turmoil. The household assembled at 11 o'clock in the drawing-room, where a fresh fire crackled and sunlight poured through the tall windows. Lady Haverford, fully recovered save for a fading bruise concealed by careful powder, presided over tea and plum cake. Diana, in a soft blue morning dress, looked younger and lighter than she had since Poirot's arrival. Even Captain Langley, his departure postponed indefinitely, sat beside her with proprietary ease. Professor Blackwood and his disgraced assistant had gone the previous day. Miss Thorne had followed quietly. Her single trunk, speaking of a lifetime's modest service, ended in sorrow. And Mr. Thorpe, handcuffed and silent, had been delivered to the authorities in York by a grim-faced constable summoned once the telephone lines were restored. Only peace remained. Lord Haverford raised his teacup. "To Monsieur Hercule Poirot," he said simply, "who came as a guest and leaves as the saviour of this house." "Hear, hear," echoed softly around the room. Poirot inclined his head with characteristic modesty. "It is the little grey cells that deserve the credit, mon ami. They merely required stimulation." Lady Haverford smiled warmly. "You have given us more than safety, monsieur. You have given us truth, and a future." She glanced toward the window, where a sleek motor car could be seen approaching up the newly cleared drive. "Ah," Poirot said with satisfaction, "that will be Monsieur Van Hoeyck, the Belgian financier of whom I spoke." The car drew up before the porte cochere, and a portly gentleman in a fur-collared coat emerged, greeted effusively by Lord Haverford. Introductions followed. Monsieur Van Hoeyck, a collector of historic English properties, had long admired Christmas Manor from photographs and descriptions. Over luncheon, delayed Christmas fare of roast beef, flaming pudding, and champagne, the terms were discussed openly. Van Hoeyck proposed to purchase the estate outright, clearing all legitimate debts, but with a generous lease allowing the Haverfords to remain as custodians for their lifetimes. The house would be restored, opened occasionally to scholars and approved visitors, but preserved as a family home. Diana's eyes shone. Captain Langley, sensing opportunity, offered to assist with modernizations, electric lighting, perhaps central heating. Lord Haverford accepted with gratitude that bordered on wonder. After the meal, the party moved to the long gallery for coffee. Sunlight now flooded the space, turning dust motes into dancing gold. The ancestral portraits seemed less stern in the bright light. Even Lady Eleanor's painted eyes appeared serene. Poirot paused before her portrait one last time. "You see, madame," he murmured to the long-dead lady, "justice comes, though it tarry 400 years." Diana joined him, slipping her hand through Captain Langley's arm. "Do you think she's truly at peace now, Monsieur Poirot?" "I think, mademoiselle, that houses, like people, heal when truth is spoken within their walls, say. The Grey Lady sought justice for betrayal. Today betrayal has been unmasked in her name. It is fitting." Lord Haverford approached, holding a small leather case. "A token of our gratitude," he said, opening it to reveal a handsome gold pocket watch, its back engraved with the Haverford crest and the date. Poirot accepted it with genuine pleasure. "Magnifique! I shall treasure it always, and wind it with particular care." Laughter rippled, light, genuine laughter that had been absent too long from these ancient rooms. Later, as Poirot's car, a comfortable Daimler arranged by Van Hoeyck, waited to take him to the station, the entire household gathered on the steps to see him off. Lady Haverford pressed a small parcel into his hands, Belgian chocolates she had somehow procured from York. Diana kissed his cheek shyly. Captain Langley shook his hand with military vigour. Even the servants lined the steps, Mrs. Bates bobbing a curtsy and the footmen touching their caps. Lord Haverford's farewell was simplest and deepest. "You came as a stranger on a winter's night," he said, voice thick. "You leave as a friend forever." Christmas Manor and the Haverfords owe you everything." Poirot twinkled. "I came for a mystery, mon ami. I leave with the greatest gift of all, a happy ending." He climbed into the car, George beside him, and waved as they moved down the drive. In the rearview mirror, he watched the little group on the steps. Family reunited, future secured, framed against the mellow stone of the manor, glowing in winter sunlight. As the car turned onto the main road, Poirot leaned back against the leather upholstery, stroking his moustache with contentment. Another case concluded, order restored from chaos. Justice served with precision. And yet, as the Moors rolled past and York Station approached, a small smile played about his lips. For in his pocket, beside the new gold watch, lay one final white camellia, pressed carefully between sheets of tissue. The last bloom from the Grey Lady's hothouse tribute. A souvenir, perhaps, or a reminder that even in the most rational of solutions, a touch of mystery may linger, like the faint, impossible scent of lavender on a winter's breeze. Back at Christmas Manor, as the sun set on the shortest days of the year, the great Yule log finally burned to embers in the hall. Servants sang carols softly in the kitchens. Diana and Captain Langley walked the newly revealed gardens, planning spring plantings. Lord and Lady Haverford sat before the fire, hands entwined as in their youth. And in the long gallery, as twilight gathered and the first stars appeared, a servant passing on her duties paused for a moment. She could have sworn, just for an instant, that a breath of cold air stirred the turkey carpet, and the faint rustle of silk sounded from the minstrel's gallery above. But when she looked up, nothing moved. Only moonlight silvered the ancient panelling, and Lady Eleanor's portrait smiled gently down. The servant smiled too, shook her head at fancy, and went about her work. The Grey Lady had walked her last. On this dawn of true Christmas justice, peace had come to Christmas Manor at last. And in the quiet heart of the old house, 4 centuries of sorrow dissolved like melting snow, leaving only warmth and light and the promise of many merry Christmases yet to come.